For Nanai Mokachin in the island.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to commend the member for Davenport for once more bringing before Parliament this piece of legislation, Bill C-210, an act to establish the Canadian Solar Energy Institute. As he has already said, it is very similar to legislation which was approved by the House previously. I hope that this time the House will pass it, that the committee will pass it, and as will the other place, and that this legislation will go onto the statute books. I don't want to talk it to death, and therefore I shall make my comments very brief. I think the reason why something along the line of what is proposed by the member should be put into effect is, first of all, that we need to recognize in Canada just how serious the energy situation is. I noticed the member for Davenport several times refer to the fact that solar energy would save so many 100,000 barrels of oil in the year 2000 and so many 100,000 barrels more by the year 2025. The fact of the matter is that by the year 2025, in terms of conventional oil, we may not have very much oil. Our own oil supplies are probably going to be exhausted in the mid-1990s. The international authorities estimate that by the year 2000 or earlier, that Saudi Arabia will be the only country in the world with oil to export. So that the fossil fuels, oil, gas, and coal, are being very rapidly depleted. And unfortunately, we become so used to these crises that we become hardened to them and fail to recognize just how serious the situation is. That means that all of our technology and our science and our forward planning ought to be devoted to looking at renewable sources of energy. Whether that's geothermal power or tidal power or utilization of forest waste or biomass or solar energy, all of them have a part to play. And we ought to be using our research and scientific facilities looking at these various options. I'm one of the persons who has said repeatedly over the years from my very limited experience that no one is going to find a cure-all for the energy crisis. There's no one thing that's going to solve the problem. It's going to have to be a mix of both renewable and non-renewable resources. That's why I've often thought that we should not rush into spending billions of dollars putting up scores of nuclear plants costing about $1 billion apiece, because if we spend too much in hard power facilities, we are going to have to stay in that area in order to get our capital investment back. So there ought to be a mix so that we can move with some flexibility into whatever areas prove most advantageous. I think all of the sources of energy, the fossil fuels, nuclear power, solar power, all the renewable energy resources are going to have to be utilized until we work out a mix that will best suit our situation in this country. And therefore, solar energy has an important part to play. And the idea of setting up an institute, if that's the best way to do it, could serve a useful purpose. I recognize, Mr. Speaker, the reservations you have about the propriety of the bill, although I would point out that while the Governor General and Council may appoint the directors, it's not mandatory that they be paid. There could be persons who are willing to devote their time. I'd be one person, and any person I'm sure would be willing to give their time free of charge as a public service. And also, it's not necessary that the government, they have to have money, the institute would have to have money, but there's no reason why under Section 7 they couldn't secure bequests and donations in various forms from companies and individuals and associations and organizations who have a stake in promoting the development of solar energy. Because I think, Mr. Speaker, that Canada has a golden opportunity, if we seize it, to be in the forefront of developing solar energy. I've had an opportunity to visit and look at what they're doing in Australia and New Zealand and Hong Kong, Singapore, Israel, and in the United States, which is probably ahead of all of the countries in this field. And I hope the time will come when the government itself, but failing the government, some institute with general support, would bring together all the research and scientific communities and the electronic industry and the governments, federally and provincial, to work on a program to find out a practical, inexpensive unit for producing solar energy. I know the experiments are going on in some of the provinces. I know Saskatchewan is carrying on an experiment now with a house which is completely serviced by solar energy. A number of private companies are making experiments. But to work on a model that, when it's approved by these various groups, could be put into mass production. Because I submit, Mr. Speaker, there's $1 billion industry that's waiting for someone to pick it up. The developing countries that haven't got hydropower, haven't got fossil fuels, are crying for a cheap, readily available, easily installed solar energy equipment. And the country that moves into that field is going to be in the forefront of what's going to be a very important part of the future energy supplying facilities of the world. And so therefore I support the member for Davenport's bill. I hope that it will receive the wholehearted support of the House and of the committee and of the other place. And I hope that as a result of this institute, if it's set up with the cooperation of all sections of the Canadian people, and particularly all levels of government, it may make a useful contribution to what I think can be a part of the solution to the energy crisis which now confronts not only Canada, but every country in the world.